I've loved his game for the past few years. Big kid, great arm, can make throws. He's more athletic than people are likely anticipating going into the season. That was Aaron Murray, former Georgia quarterback, Aaron Murray, 4-year starting quarterback, Aaron Murray, who's one of the few folks that makes a lot of sense in the media space. But Aaron, talking about Carson Beck, and you know, Aaron has had a chance, like a lot of us, to see Carson over time. When Carson first got to Georgia, real quick story on that time. When Carson got to Georgia, it looked like they were, he was going to move forward. It was going to be, I don't know about open, but there wasn't a returning starting quarterback. Jake Fromm had left. So you're getting ready for spring ball, and then all of a sudden COVID happens. And Carson Beck definitely got caught in the wash of 2020 to 2021. It looked like he was going to be JT Daniels' backup heading into the spring. Excuse me, from the spring heading into the fall, but it didn't happen. And when the time came for Carson to be the number one, Stetson beat him out that week. So there's been a lot of, Carson Beck has been through it. And he's going to have to win this battle against Brock Vandergriff. My suspicion is that he will. But I think, there's a lot to be excited about in terms of Carson specifically, because as good as Stetson Bennett has been, and he was really good. I mean, I have to say, I think people, I wonder if people ever get it right about Stetson. I mean, it took them a long time to acknowledge how good Stetson was. I wonder if that will be the case with Carson. I'm not sure. I mean, it might not be. I write about Carson um extensively in our 2023 preview, which you can get for free when you get Double Dogs. Okay, you buy Double Dogs today, and you get the 2020 preview. 2023 preview. 2020 preview was pretty boring, um, but don't miss out on this opportunity. But it talks a lot about Carson getting from Georgia, getting from Jacksonville, Georgia. He said, "I'm not the same player compared to my first year athletically, physically, mentally, even as a human being. The person I am now compared to what it was then, it's not the same. He's not the same. I mean, he was like most people, an immature 18-year-old when he got to Georgia, and he saw three people start in front of him that, as a quarterback for the NFL, he very well may be better than them for the NFL. So um, we're just gonna have to see, because there's a lot of moving parts here still. You got a lot of transition with all these guys who have been drafted. You've got the departure of Todd Monken. Mike Bobo arrives. Well, he arrived a year ago, year and a half ago. So they know Mike, but there are moving parts here that weren't moving from 22 to 21. There were guys that were drafted in that time. So maybe that's going to be something that we don't talk about as much. It's hard to ignore how much turnover though there's been at Georgia from the personnel standpoint. But Carson Beck is probably as gifted a thrower as the Dogs have had in a while. I mean, just like straight up throwing the football. So I don't know if I don't know how good he is at playing quarterback. I don't know. That's not me hating. That's not saying, oh, this guy's a star. I don't know. I know what I've seen has been pretty good, particularly in the last, let's see, sometimes I get the months, the last 18 months or so. When Carson Beck's been in the game, he's been good. Let's say 12 months, whatever. I mean, he looked good in 2022. I can't remember a time he didn't look good in 2022. In 2023 in spring, I don't know that he had a flawless G-Day, but he looked really good. And, I think, what Aaron's trying to say there, and Aaron can speak for himself, um, there was a lot of discussion about, behind the scenes. I don't know how serious it was that Carson Beck would ever start at Georgia in 2020. There was plenty of that in 2021 when JT Daniels got hurt. I mean, that was like fire, excuse me. And but if you listen to what Todd Monken had to say, Stetson, when it came to that week, Stetson just outcompeted and just beat Carson out. And that it wasn't particularly close. Other folks would tell you that the winter to spring, so the spring to the fall, excuse me, going through the summer, that Carson regressed in a way. Like he wasn't as good as they'd hoped he would be coming into 21. So in a way, he left the door open for Stetson to come in and do Stetson magic. And I think the part that we'll see if Carson's grown the way that I suspect he has is how he handles things when it's tough. There's been plenty behind the scenes that's been tough for Carson Beck. We've not seen it publicly. And probably he'll do pretty well. I mean, I don't know how many balls he's thrown in his time at Georgia, but a lot. And that's a pretty good indicator of where you're going to be when it comes time to throw the football in a game, when the Redcoats are playing. There's not a lot of obvious games here that, Georgia's going to be pressing. But what happens when they do? Look, in 22, it was not evident to Ryan and I when we went out to Missouri that was going to be the game where Georgia would have to cling to everything they had to win. I mean, it just didn't play well. Stetson was hurt, which we didn't know at the time. Jalen Carter was hurt, which was not obvious until he left the game. Smile Monday got hurt in that game. You had the turnover. Turnover's going to happen, though. I mean, like, all this stuff happens in a season. And they had to dig that one out. And Stetson was used to that. He'd been through that before. Stetson had played poorly and won games. It had happened. Now, it happened in 2020, but it happened. So he knew how to do that. The other thing about Carson that I think, there's two things I want to touch on real quick I don't want to forget about. Sometimes I should write these things down as I'm thinking. But, the one thing I remember from being in college that I improved the most was from freshman to sophomore year. We didn't see that with Carson Beck. We didn't really get to see that. I mean, it was covered up. But the longer you're around the same program, the more comfortable you are, the more grown up you become, the more you have investment in what happens on that podium at the end of seasons. Number two, I don't know if other people talk about this or not. A lot of people that talk on YouTube and so forth, they've not been around very long, or they don't know what the hell they're talking about, or they don't cover the team. There's plenty of that going on. God bless y'all. This has been 5 years ago now. Carson, we were there during this season. Carson won the state championship in Florida with a team that had pretty good wide receivers for Mandarin, but they weren't elite the way that kind of he has been in college. And he didn't have as good a senior year as he had as a junior in 18. And they really had to fight. And I remember talking to, I can't remember the head coach's name. His first name is Bobby. But he was worried going into that senior season if, for Carson, if they could replace at wide receiver. And I don't think they quite did. But he took a program, I should say, in Mandarin that was never good. And then won the state championship in the highest classification, period. So, a lot's riding on what happens with Carson. Aaron saying, I loved his game for the past few years. Big kid, great arm. He can make the throws. He can. Listen, y'all. We hear behind the scenes a lot. Like, we talk to folks. They have loved Carson Beck's arm talent for years. 3 years, whatever year we're on, since he got there. So that has been something that's not been talked about a lot necessarily. but can he play quarterback? Can he play quarterback? And can the guy from the last starting quarterback from Georgia, Aaron Murray, can the guy who coached him at Georgia for those 4 years, Mike Bobo, have the same sort of magic offensively as they did at the time with Aaron? Because that Stetson left does not mean that Georgia will become worse necessarily. Okay? They might not. They might be better offensively. I know that's kind of hard to imagine considering you're losing A.D. Mitchell, you're losing players. Darnell, A.D., Kenny. I mean, there were some explosive playmakers there, but they got a lot back. They got a lot of players back. This is a really good offense, and you have a more traditional Mac Jones-ish type quarterback. Dare I say Joe Burrow, slightly less athletic. You're welcome, Carson. Than Joe Burrow type player. I mean, you don't want to compare people to, the second best quarterback in professional football right now, which is Joe Burrow. But I will do that because I think he's more like Mac Jones. But I think Carson Beck, I think Carson Beck could be really, really good. But he's gonna have to show it and prove it. And we're gonna see if that happens. I don't know.